Today we are talking about going beyond the Big Four. Now, in a previous episode, I did the Big Four. What is the Big Four, you ask? The Big Four is census records, probate records, land records, and vital records. Those are the Big Four record groups that I find the most useful to help prove the next generation back as you're going generation by generation, right? So that's the Big Four, but today we're going beyond the Big Four. So in the previous episode, I'll leave a link in the description for that previous episode if you haven't seen it. But that was like a few weeks ago, and so now we're kind of going to the next step. We're going to see if we can find some other records because not everybody had probate records. Not everybody had land records. Some people didn't ever own land, and so there aren't any deeds to find. So in some cases, vital records didn't exist at the time that your ancestor, or you were researching your ancestor. You get the idea. All right. So we're going to walk through the handout, and we're going to go through all of these items in the handout, and we'll talk a little bit about each one of them. We'll talk about how you can get eligible to get the handout. All those details coming up next. If there's a handout for this episode, you can download it with one of the higher level memberships on YouTube or on Patreon. For $10 to $15 a month, depending on the membership, you can have access to the handouts as they are produced to go with the newest video. If you are a Genealogy TV Academy member, you have access to all of the handouts ever produced, available anytime in the handouts library. If you are not a member of any of those, you can still purchase the individual handouts at genealogytv.org. Producing these videos really does take a lot of time and resources, so every membership helps keep them coming. To learn more about memberships, go to genealogytv.org/memberships and you can learn all about it. The handouts really do help support the channel, and for that, I truly thank you. And yes, there is a handout for this. As you can see, it's about 5 pages long. So let's jump in and go through it. So if you want to take notes, that's fine. You might want to do that if you do not want to get the handout. So here we are in the first part of this handout, which actually recaps the Big Four. So we've got census records, vital records. So briefly, census records, really great because they are taken, at least in the United States, every 10 years. And, they have the family units together and we can really trace that back. If you are brand new to genealogy, census records are kind of the backbone of what we do. Now, vital records, everybody always wants to go search for vital records. They want that death certificate. They want that birth certificate. They want that marriage certificate. They feel like they got to have them. The problem is a lot of them were not created until the early 1900s. So if you're looking for a birth certificate in 1810, it's not going to be there. You might find birth registries, you might find other church records and that kind of thing to help fill the gaps. But marriage records were really created long before birth certificates and death certificates were created. So in the United States, those didn't really come along until the early 1900s, depending on the location. Okay, probate records, the gold standard, right? If you can find the probate package, this really, really does have the information that you want is in probate, because now not everybody had probate, but if there was land, there's probate a lot of times. And so who inherited that property? And so that's what probate's all about. The land records, again, if you find a probate package, there's going to be at the county level typically land records where the land is being transferred from one person to another. So you could pick up the land records when your ancestor first purchased the land, and then you can also get the deeds when they are selling the land, or maybe it's being handed down to the children. All right, so let's go into the part beyond the Big Four. So tax records are really helpful. Tax records, but they're typically only listed, especially as we get back in time, for men. People, usually men when they become of age, depending on what the law said at the time as to what of age is, could be 18, 16, 20. It just depends on the location. but there was a poll tax a lot of times. There's also property tax. There's a lot of different types of tax records that you can find. So tax records may be one that you want to look for. Social Security records. Let's talk about this because I've actually done a couple episodes on Social Security records. Now in the United States, this is a thing. Outside of the United States, not so much. At least not that I know of. So Social Security in the United States began in the 1930s. There are four, maybe five different types of records you can find, and usually only two of them are available online. So there's the Social Security Death Index, which everybody is familiar with if you've been doing genealogy for any amount of time. If your ancestor died with and having a Social Security card, they are probably listed on the Social Security Death Index. Now, keep in mind that while Social Security started in the 1930s, the Death Index didn't start until the 1960s. But they went back and usually indexed all of that information. So sometimes you'll find them on the Social Security Death Index. Now, there's also a thing called the Social Security Applications and Claims Index. Let me back up. The Social Security Death Index is available on Ancestry and on FamilySearch and on MyHeritage. Then there is the Social Security Applications and Claims Index, which has similar information but may have more information. That is only available that I know of on Ancestry. And so if you find your ancestor in the Social Security Death Index, go look at the Applications and Claims Index to see if either children or a spouse may have made an application for benefits, because there's extra information in that record, and that is often available. There is also the Numident records, which may or may not be helpful. There is also the SS5. You have to write for the SS5 to get that record. So Social Security records are awesome. They can really provide some information. Now, the SS5, in my case, for one of my ancestors, I was able to find them in the Social Security Death Index and this is a married couple, a Social Security Applications and Claims Index. When I wrote for my great-grandmother for her Social Security SS5 record, this is the application in which they originally signed up for Social Security. It's called the SS5. That SS5 had her parents' names on it. So I was able to confirm, because these were Danish immigrants, I did not know for sure who these people were. So it was a good find for me. Moving on, state and local census records. Now keep in mind that state and local census is not everywhere. And let's just really talk about state census. I did another video all about the state census records, but state census are in select states at select times, but a lot of times they were in between the federal census. So if the federal census is, 1850, 1860, 1870, some of those state censuses might have happened in 1865 or 1855. So they may be in between. There is varying amounts of states with, some had none, some had one, some had many. So Kansas comes to mind as to having some state census records, and sometimes that has more information. So you want to be looking for state census. Now you can find a lot of those on FamilySearch and on Ancestry. I know they're on Ancestry. I think they're on FamilySearch as well. Let's talk about immigration and emigration. So if you're not familiar with the terms immigration and emigration, immigration with an I is incoming. That's the way I remember it. And emigration is exiting, E. Emigration with an E is exiting the country. So a lot of times there are records in both places. You may not know that, but a lot of people look for those immigration records where they're arriving into the United States or your home country. But emigration records, a lot of times people had to let the government know they were leaving. They're headed for America, and they left behind records. I know for my Danish ancestors who left, they had to go to the police department and fill out information saying, bye-bye, we're moving on. And so they filled out that information, and those records, some of those are available, just depends on which country they are leaving from. Hey, we're going to get back to that video here in just a moment, but I want to let you know that Genealogy TV has a website, a newsletter, and a Facebook page. Links for all of that are in the description box below the video. All right, let's get back to it. Military records. Oh my gosh, there's so much here. So, military records, again, depends on your ancestor, depends on when they were, serving, if they served. There are draft registration cards. Typically for World War I, World War II, there's the draft registration registries for Civil War in the United States. Keep in mind that just because they may be registered for the draft does not mean that they served. So be mindful of that. But a lot of times if you find those draft registration cards and you believe from an obituary or something that tells you that your ancestor had military service, there's going to be military service records to find if they survived. Now, some of those military records, I know the Army and I think it was maybe wrong, part of the Navy was destroyed in a fire. And these are World War II records, but, it's better to check. So if you think that one of your ancestors has military service, then there may be more to find than just the draft registration cards that you're finding online. Fold 3 is another great place to go look for those military records. Family histories. All right, let's talk about family histories. So family histories are a great place for clues. Please do not just automatically import from other family histories, though, because it may be that, whoever brought that in just didn't have any sources. You want to look for the sources. So you can tell a good researcher by the number of sources they have on their ancestors. So if some researchers have no sources at all, they've just been importing stuff from other people, and it is probably full of errors. This is going to drive me crazy. Is there a typo here? History. Family history can provide. Okay, we fixed that. Okay, so long story short is just verify with records, but they're a great place for clues. A lot of times I go through my whole research process, though, and I never even look at family histories because my goal is to prove the next generation back. If I find the records I'm looking for and I have succeeded in whatever my goal is, I don't bother to look at family histories unless I'm curious and I want to see if they have something I don't have. And that's usually in the form of photographs. So I'll go to their gallery, I'll look for photographs, I'll see if they've maybe imaged some records that they have uploaded in their gallery. I know when I go to the archives, for example, not only will I get PDF copies of everything, and I will get that depending on the archive, if I can get that on a jump drive, it's even better because then I can just upload it to my computer. But sometimes they give you those paper copies and then I digitize it. And then what I will also do while I have that file open, I will, with my cell phone, photograph every page, because a photograph, if the handwriting is faint and it's hard to read, the photograph is going to be so much easier to read than a PDF that has high contrast or a bad copy because it's too light of ink and it just didn't copy very well. Images are really great. Now, and sometimes I will upload those images to my family tree, as others will do too. So it might be that people copy a page from a book. Please, if you do that, though, please put some information about what book it came from, because it drives me crazy if I go, oh, this page 398, where did that come from? Doesn't say. Then I got to contact the tree owner and they go, oh, I did that a long time ago, I don't remember. So I found it in some book somewhere. Might have been at the local library. Who knows? So long story short, family histories are great for clues. Artifacts. Let's talk about family artifacts. Bibles, letters, these things are gold. I love them. Journals, oh my gosh. One of my favorite artifacts that I was able to have for several years before I gave it back to the owner was a World War II POW's diary. And oh my gosh, I pored over that. I photographed it. I transcribed every bit of it. It had a lot of images, hand-drawn pictures that the POWs would draw to pass time, I guess. in the books, and it was just an absolutely beautiful book. It talked about the daily life and everything. So family artifacts can be really, really, really great. If you photograph family Bibles, please, please, please photograph the front matter as well. That's the title pages and stuff. Why, you ask? Because it helps us date the Bible. And by dating the Bible, it helps us date the information within the Bible. So if you know how in the center section, a lot of times you'll have birth, marriage, and death information, and everybody's written stuff in there. We want to look at the ink. We want to see how often, if the ink pressure is exactly the same, but the dates are like, 50 years old from the last entry, then all of that stuff was probably written a long time ago, and it kind of gives us some evaluation tips as to how accurate that information is. Because if that information is written 20, 30 years later, the memory of the writer might not be clear. So we need to pay attention to the pressure of the ink, the different types of ink, the different handwriting. You can tell when groups of entries were done all at the same time, and it's usually the last date in that entry block that gives you an estimated time as to when that information was written. And so that's kind of how we evaluate Bibles. Letters often are dated, which is beautiful. You may have other things like family quilts. I've seen quilts that are like each square had a different ancestor on it with dates on it and stuff. We have one of those in our family. I would love to have it, but no, another family member has it. But you know how it is. So there's, you've got photographs and all kinds of things that may have information and clues in them. So that's a lot of fun. City directories. Let's talk about city directories for a moment. City directories are awesome because they usually were created every 2 years, and they were in between other records, right? So you might have census records every 10 years, but the city directories may be filling in the blanks. So one of the reasons why we love city directories so much is you can put a timeline down as to exactly where somebody was. And I know it can be kind of a pain in the butt to go and import every city directory for your ancestor, but I'm telling you, you want to do this. And the reason why is because every now and then there's extra information in there, and like the last city directory before a person moves or after a person moves, it might say move to Chicago, and it's like bingo, because it'll be in parentheses. And that was pretty standard in a lot of city directories. And so you'll want to really kind of bring all of those city directories in. I know on Ancestry, we can't see necessarily in chronological order all those city directories. It just says city directory, and it looks like we have duplicate records in there, and it can be kind of a pain in the butt. But it's worth it a lot of times to bring them all in and add them to your ancestors profile. Newspapers. Oh, do we need to talk about newspapers I mean, that's kind of a no-brainer, isn't it? We get newspapers not only have the social columns, they might have big news. If somebody's been in an accident, or, there's some crime going on. If our ancestors passed away, the obituaries often are in the newspapers. The newspapers, or the social media of the day. So we can find out a lot of information in newspapers. The trick is finding the newspapers. So don't give up. So if you think Ancestry has them all, they don't. If you think, newspaperarchives.com has them all, they don't. There's a bunch of them. There's Chronicling America and Genealogy Bank and Old News now with My Heritage Company. There's a ton of different places. The trick is to figure out where the newspapers are for the area in which you're researching. How do you do that? We'll talk about that in a little bit. But another trick you can do is go to the county library, and ask them, where the newspapers are from the mid-1800s for this area. And a lot of times the person that's working the desk would know. Church records. We got to talk about church records. So church records are super important, especially before the separation of church and state, right? So we have civil records. Those are things like the birth certificates, marriage certificates, and that kind of stuff. And then we've got church records that might have birth registries, death registries, cemetery records, because if somebody was buried in the church graveyard, then there might be burial information there. There might be marriage registries and events, church events that your ancestor was participating in. Some, depending on the church, might have journals that are, like minutes or meeting minutes like the Quakers do. And so there may be additional information that you can find in some of that information. So where do you find these records? Well, one of my favorite places to go is the FamilySearch Wiki. So if you go to search and drop down to the Research Wiki, almost everything you could possibly think of is in there. So you just drill into your location and then the type of records that you're looking for. So you always want to start with the end in mind. What are you looking for? And so keep that in mind when you're going to the Research Wiki and you're trying to find those places. You've also got other sources like Cindy's List. You've got state archives, local archives, the county library, genealogical societies, historical societies, these groups, DAR, SAR, all of these different groups. You may find some more information out there beyond the big four that I haven't even listed here. So make sure you check that out. I hope you will check the subscription though, and make sure that you're subscribed, because some people, I guess YouTube is unsubscribing people. I don't know. But make sure you're subscribed. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything. And that way you stay in the know as to what the latest in the genealogy world is. And we'll see you in the next episode. How would you feel if you could resolve some of those brick walls in your family tree? Or maybe you're just getting started in genealogy. What if you had the skills to prove your family history, taking you back generation by generation, time and time again? Hi, my name is Connie Knox, and here at the Genealogy TV Academy, I help genealogy enthusiasts like you break down brick walls by learning smart research methods. I help you find the records, and I help you get organized so that you can share your family history with your family and future generations. I do this through a monthly membership course. There are two components to this. Now, there is the self-guided platform where you can take the courses on your own time. And, well, I'm adding one new lesson per month. And then the live Zoom meetings where you can watch a live presentation in the virtual classroom and participate in the discussion after the presentation. Now, if you can't make one of the live sessions, don't worry. All the programs are recorded and are added in the course platform following the presentation. So, are you ready to learn some new skills to help prove your family history, get organized, and break down some of those brick walls? All right, well, if you want to learn more, hit the Get Start button to learn a little bit more about pricing and how you can get signed up. All right, we'll see you in the virtual classroom.